boy, Big Dave. Another episode of Culture Dads right here at imperiumpress.org/podcast. Speaking of exclusive episodes, I got a guy that you guys are going to be familiar with. I have Mr. Thomas777. What's going on, Thomas?
Hi, Dave. Thanks for hosting me again. It's always happy to collaborate with Imperium and anybody associated with it.
Yeah, my pleasure, sir. So me and Mr. Thomas share quite a few similar interests, and we're going to get into all that kind of stuff. But I want to get started with, let's get right into it. Thomas, let's talk about some metal. How'd you get into heavy metal?
Well, I made the point the other day. I mean, it's on my Telegram channel. Somebody raised the question as to, why there's not really new music anymore. Not just that, why isn't there anything, kind of dynamic in pop culture being released? There's really not like any new music, quite literally. When a lot of younger people, I think it's kind of lost on them that really until the 2010s, there really was a subculture around there really were subcultures around various music genres. Okay, it was like a tangible thing. Some of it was contrived and kind of not particularly organic. It was kind of the sort of stuff that was cultivated by marketing departments. But I mean, some of it was authentic. And when I was a kid in the 80s, that was really what was on the radio. It was kind of a strange time because radio and MTV was king, but there was really a lot of there was things were really kind of stagnant. Like people, there was still kind of like the hangover of the 70s. And what was on the radio, it really wasn't stuff that had any appeal to to me, but to younger people generally. And metal really insinuated a kind of bona fide energy into music, and there was an entire kind of like ethos around it, and that was something that had been festering for a real long time. Like I think this was started by bands like the Ramones and like Hawkwind and like Motorhead, back in the 70s, kind of in revolt against a really kind of staid culture. And I think there's always been a prejudice against rock and roll. Okay, it's not just some corny cliche, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was in full force in the 1980s. And if you listen to metal, you felt like you really were kind of up on something that was outside the mainstream. And as an alienated kid, that really kind of spoke to me. And I think to some degree too, man, like all these bands like Priest, like Maiden, like Diamond Head, that kind of like really really kind of established the heavy metal sound. I mean, I know like Sabbath, is kind of recognized as the first true metal band, but the bands I mentioned that kind of came to define it in formal terms, that very much was a Cold War phenomenon, and there was a weird kind of conformity that was enforced in the 1980s, and as well as a basic kind of anxiety about the world situation. And even if you were a kid, you like perceived that in very concrete terms. You didn't understand like the nuances of it or like the politics behind it, but so listening to metal really was kind of a reprieve from all of that. And then there really was like a subculture around it, man. Like if you go, if you would, like, there was always in every town, I mean, at least like where I grew up, North Shore, Chicago, every town had like a record shop, and like every record shop worth anything, had like a dedicated heavy metal section. And like when new albums dropped, it was a big deal, and like you'd meet guys and some girls, but it was mostly guys, who like congregate around there, and like it really was a community, man. So
Yeah.
I think that's why, man. That initially that was why. Um, and then I mean as time went on, I mean I'm one of the few people. I think the '90s for music was kind of an unsung era. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, like what was on the radio was mostly garbage, but that's kind of the way things have been since the '70s, but there's a lot of dynamic stuff happening in metal in the '90s, some experimental and some not so innovative, but it was even the stuff that was pretty recycled. Was still there was a lot of there's a lot of there's a lot of energy in the genre still, and in some ways it was stripped down and it gone back to its roots in a way. So I mean, I as like a teenager and a young adult, I just still found myself comfortable in the scene, as it were. I mean, that's the kind of short answer.
Yeah. Recently, and this kind of like flooded all kinds of thoughts back, all kinds of like feelings and like stuff like that. I recently watched the newest Beavis and Butthead movie. It's called Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe. And I went into it like everything. I was like, oh God, another remake, another whatever. And at this point, I kind of view Beavis and Butthead as like this was childish. This was retarded, right? And this was crude and this and that. And I probably, even if it's not completely paused and twisted and perverted, I'm probably gonna still think it's stupid. I'll tell you what, I loved it. It was not paused, and in fact, the guy that writes Beavis and Butthead, Mike Judge, was like took a lot of shots at like leftoids and as much as he could. Right, he clowned on. There's like a scene where Beavis and Butthead wander into a university, and there's some feminist goofball, professor, and she's like, "You have white privilege," and they're like, "Wow, cool, we have white privilege." And then they went and started stealing French fries. They stole a cop car, and everything went catastrophically wrong. But I'll tell you what, I watched this. It felt like this was like a blast from the past. I felt like '90s Chad pulled up in his souped up Geo Tracker, got out with his Jinko jeans and fresh Airwalks, and pulled up with like a Pantera blasting on cassette and punched all of the Zoomers collectively in the face. That's what I felt like I watched. And, it felt good to kind of like be transported back in time to just like this like simple kind of like just laughing at dick jokes and just, yeah, it was crude. It's still crude. It's still retarded, but I really loved it because it reminded me of how like great the '90s were as far as culture creation. As you mentioned, like you said, the first heavy metal band is going to sort of pinned as Black Sabbath, and I would agree with that. They're really they're like the golden age. They're the primordial metal, right? And then you get into like the silver age of metal, which is like the '80s. You have you get into bands like Motorhead and you mentioned all the new wave of British heavy metal, and then you get into some of the early speed metal stuff, right? And then you get the early albums from the thrash bands that we all know: Testament, Exodus, Death Angel, Slayer, etc., Sepultura. But in the '90s, as you said, this was a time where it kind of just like really expanded. This is where you get all of the really the best death metal albums. This is where you get all the best black metal albums. This is where you get all the best albums from the kings of thrash that started in the '80s. Guys like Black Sabbath and the old school guys are putting out great albums. This is the era where you get Dehumanizer, which is a very underrated album. This is you get so much great stuff in this era, and I remember being part of it. And this was, as you mentioned, there was a subculture around this. I remember going to the local shows. This is when venues were popping. You could buy zines. You bought CDs and cassettes. It was cool. There was record stores. It was awesome. And I think that a lot of people today, a lot of young guys today, they don't understand how immersive, how important, and how meaningful these subcultures were. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's a point I made. Like I said, and there's a lot of stuff. You read like you read stuff like the Atlantic, but also like more serious business rags. They're always posing the question rhetorically, like, what happened to the music industry, and they come up short in explaining why there's not like a music industry anymore. I mean, yeah, it's like, okay, the monopoly on production and everything, was really kind of artificial, owing to the fact that, there was barriers to entry. But the whole, the reason why there's not new music is like, it's just what I said. Like, basically, like, for a band to become like a thing, or for like rock stardom, like whoever, like, whatever, whether I'm not saying like, rock stardom was any kind of great thing or anything, but my point is, like, for any kind of band to become branded and become like a cultural phenom and have a following, like, there had to be a kind of like infrastructure around it. There had to be like record labels, there had to be like radio, there had to be like youth media, like MTV, for better or worse. And there had, and that like sustained it. Okay. And like created this kind of like mystique and this kind of like world unto itself, like around it, to make it a thing. Like that, without those kinds of platforms, without that kind of like infrastructure, for lack of a better word, like you really don't have any music scene. I mean, yeah, you've got guys who got ability, like, cranking out music. I mean, anybody can, produce themselves now. I mean, which is incredible. But, there's not, in the absence of what I said, you're not really going to have, music scenes. And because like it's impossible to monetize too, like it's you're gonna have like less and less guys, unfortunately, like dedicating themselves to that kind of thing, and any more than like a cursory kind of capacity. So that's why, and that's what was weird, man, because you'll run across like young people, and like everybody listens to old music because like there is no new music, and because everybody's obsessed with data. It's like, oh, like, they people like they collect like songs from different eras, people would fucking collect like like old books or something, like, and it's like, which is really weird. But yeah, and I mean, on the one hand, that's kind of dope that like you can find like any jams from like any era like at your fingertips. On the other hand, yeah, I mean, it's people have lost something because there is no subculture around it. There's not shows to go to. There's not like anything new, and that's kind of lame. I mean, I think people, especially young people, are kind of like missing out on stuff, and it's got to be hard. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be hard for youngsters to connect with each other, man. Like on common ground. I mean, I think about that a lot. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember, how important that was for me, like socially and developmentally, going to a show and just wiling out and just being a chimp. You know what I mean? Just going, head banging until my neck hurts, blowing my ears and my voice out, getting in the mosh pit, and just being just like this uncaged retard. And that was just so, you'd made friends, you did bad kid shit, you met girls. It was fun. You know what I mean? And there was like this whole, it was a culture, right, that you could be a part of. It was like almost like a Mannerbund that you could go be part of. And that's completely gone. And you mentioned about how there's no new music and everything like that. Well, it's because, these guys are reaping what they sowed. You know what I mean? It's in 1996, they passed what was called the Telecommunications Act, and Bill Clinton signed this in. And effectively what this did was overturn the previous 1934 Communications Act. And what that was effectively the government in 1934 said that with the advent of radio, that you could not, corporations were not allowed to have monopolies on radio stations. Radio stations belonged to localities, and that's how it was. You weren't allowed to own more than 3 or something like that, because they saw the writing on the wall. And what this did was, as you mentioned, it created this infrastructure. So we, as guys that are a little bit older, grew up hearing local bands. Like the local DJ was a specialist. He was a guy that was in the local music scene. He knew the bands. He helped promote them. He brought them up. Hey, hey, we got this show going. We're giving away free tickets and blah, 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 blah. If you call in and you can name the drummer from this album, or, you know what I mean? Remember that kind of stuff? That was really important. And from this fertile, localized soil grew these things. But what happened in 1996 with the Telecommunications Act, this effectively handed over every single radio station to guys like, Clear Broadcasting, Viacom, these like, these just great Satans, right? That completely, and they also call this radio homogenization. And from that point on, every single radio in the entire country got completely bought up. They're all now in the hands of 3 fucking guys, and they play all the same shit. And that completely killed, that literally ripped the spine out of these localized music subculture infrastructures.
Yeah, it's kind of a perfect convergence of circumstances, and that's one of that's two of the weird things in my lifetime, that there's no new music, and there's really there's no actual movies made anymore. Like, on the one hand, there are a handful of like great films. Like I really like Blade Runner 2049. There's every few years there's a handful of movies that are worthwhile. But by and large, there's not like new films made anymore by big studios. Part of that's because the global market, there's censorship built into it. Because you want to market stuff in places like China, it's got to kind of be devoid of any meaningful content. So they just make these like these Marvel Comics movies that aren't even really movies. Like Martin Scorsese said, he's like, these aren't movies in the traditional sense we understand cinema. It's like it's like an amusement park ride without like the motion element or something. Like it's not, or it's like a video game where they they only passively observe rather than actually engaging with in a control capacity. I mean, it's like, and the degree to which movies, like popular movies, I mean, some were great, some were shit, but the degree to which popular movies and music, kind of shaped people's, not just like the way they consumed culture, but, kind of like the stuff they were into, like that really can't be overstated, man. And like very suddenly, like it both just kind of like ceased to exist. And that's really weird. I wouldn't have a lot of stuff that came to pass. I kind of saw coming. I mean, not because I'm any kind of augur or anything, because I think it was pretty obvious. In terms of like historical kind of trends or something, but I would not have guessed that like there'd be no more new music, and like the film industry would basically like cease to exist in favor of just like movies about like superheroes for kids. Like it's really kind of weird.
Yeah. And I will say that what we're talking about here is like big box office movies. We're talking about popular culture, like that kind of. There is still really great art in like the indie spheres and the indie scenes. There's underground stuff. The underground stuff is where if you want to observe and consume and enjoy good, fresh, imaginative art, you got to look for it. You got to go to the underground. There's so many great books and great indie films and great music out, but you got to dig for it. And the corporations don't do anything to help. In fact, they step on it, right? Every band now has to be like their own. They have to be their own PR team. They have to be like all of the above. They can't just be cool guys that play cool music anymore and then get lifted up. They have to do all of the above. So what happens is it creates it creates like a gate that like talented people can't pass through anymore.
No,
most guys. Go ahead.
No, and people got to be proactive. Like I make that point a lot. I get out and I see people. I mean, I literally like travel around a lot. At least a couple of times a year, to like go see people who I connect with on our platforms or who read my stuff. And I mean that's essential, man. Not just because I appreciate people who want to engage on these terms, and it's essential to rebuild social capital as a question of advancing our politics. But there's not built-in kind of infrastructure anymore for people to interact. It's the system is kind of tailored to isolate you sort of like in your own home, literally like doing your own thing, and people have to break out of that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, on the one hand, you know, it's this kind of open air prison, metaphorically speaking. I mean, is very bad because it really is isolating people. I mean, psychically as well as physically. However, I mean, you can connect with people all over this fucking planet, you know, just by you know getting on your little Chromebook or whatever or your freaking smartphone. I mean, it's like so there's not you know there's not really an excuse for not being proactive in that regard. I mean, I realize I don't like work a 9 to 5 job, and I'm pretty lucky because like I've got the freedom, you know, because I realize like I'm a single man. If you know if you got a family, it's and you know you've got certain obligations that are incumbent that might you know preclude some of this kind of stuff. But you know I've literally met like dozens of people, man, just by like you know making it clear like my door is always open and inviting people to come see me, and by getting out you know to freaking visit people, whether they're you know on the East Coast, the West Coast, you know wherever the hell they're at. And you know I feel like there's a real like physical community ossifying around our values, you know, owing to the fact that you know many other people are doing what I do. So you know there's that too. I mean there are there are ways to connect with people that there were not before. And you know I think it balances out. But yeah, like as an individual, you got to be very proactive, man. And I realize not everybody can do that, owing to you know limitations of work and you know or family or whatever. But
Yeah.
I emphasize that a lot to people, especially because people are always asking like you know what's a productive thing to do, you know, or what's a way to kind of push back against you know the kind of oppressive anti-culture that we're mired in. I just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I say all the time, support folk economy, give your money to people that you think are good, that make good content, that make good culture, that create good art that you agree with. And most importantly, get out into the world and meet these people and make friends. There's nothing worse than isolation. There's nothing worse than loneliness. And it's not just because we're like, you know, edgy fringe political people that we're feeling kind of lonely and isolated. It's everybody's lonely. And your average normie is like isolated. You go to like your average normie's house, they sit and they take a blast of some dabs, and then they sit and stare and drool while Netflix drones in the background. They live these really, really sad existences. They work, they go home, they watch TV, they go to sleep, they jerk off. That's like all they do. You know what I mean?
You're right.
So it's like it's not just us; it's the entirety of the world is in this situation. It's just we are the difference between us and the normals is that we're aware of the damaging circumstances. So it's like up to us to go and actually do something. The normal, he doesn't have the self-awareness to be like, wow, this is bad for me. He just goes along with the flow.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. So talking about, I wanted to bring one more thing up to you about metal, because this is something that I've noticed that I think is pretty interesting. You know, we're talking about kind of these like, and I really hate when people go, oh, well, that's just nostalgia. This is just nostalgia. You're just getting a little warm nostalgia fuzzies in your belly. That's not actually, you're not actually liking this. This isn't actually an art movement or anything like that. I absolutely hate that, because it kind of discounts the idea of certain art forms having immortality, right? And what I've noticed in metal is I sort of, you know, if you talked to me 10 years ago, I was turbo, extreme metal, everything. I loved the fastest, most brutal shit I could find. That was what I was about, right? Now, and you know, partly, I guess, because I'm getting older a little bit, but I feel like not only has that gotten kind of stale, but the people that still play extreme metal, the bands out there, are overproduced. It sounds too crisp. They've begun to worship the technicality of it instead of writing really powerful songs. And it kind of lost its magic. So what I've been noticing is a lot of guys are starting to bring back these old styles. You know, this thing like doom, stoner, and psychedelic stuff is like really, really getting big, right? And I'm one of them. I'm really getting into this kind of stuff. Anything that's sort of like Black Sabbath adjacent, we got this whole movement called the new wave of traditional heavy metal, which is like bands that sound like Merciful Fate and Iron Maiden and like, you know, all those kinds of old school bands. It's like the biggest thing happening in metal right now. So it's like, by all logic, right? The trajectory should have kept getting more technical, more proficient, more etc. Instead, you now have guys that are completely rejecting that and going backwards into these older art forms. And I think it's that those art forms, those like kind of primordial styles of metal, had like immortality. It's not so much that they got left behind or that we're getting nostalgia, but it's that they are just immortally true and will be good forever. Whereas some of these other genres have like fizzled out once they're kind of some of the bells and whistles stopped sounding so interesting. You know what I mean? Am I making sense?
People try and reinvent the wheel, man. Like like I said, the reason why I raised Motorhead and the Ramones is because, you know, they, you know, the impact that both of those bands had on metal, like, really can't be overstated. And like neither of those bands like tried to reinvent the wheel, you know. And I mean, like, really what made bands that came later that had, you know, this more kind of like virtuoso sort of sensibilities, like Judas Priest. I mean, yeah, they definitely, you know, they definitely added some finesse to that. But, you know, there's this idea particularly in metal, because like metal was always kind of tech obsessed, you know, in a way, and kind of always in awe of, like, you know, the virtuoso. There was this idea that, you know, like there's this idea like every generation, like, you know, like the style had to be tweaked or something, or that, you know, like every iteration like had to like reinvent itself, you know, in an extreme capacity or like in an evolved fucking way. And like that was really misguided. And that's one of the reasons why like metal kind of lost its way at the turn of the millennium, you know, because I mean, it just kind of like unraveled itself, because yeah, like you know, you had I mean, I've got there's death metal bands that I like. I really like Morbid Angel. I was a fan of like Barnes era Cannibal Corpse, but you know, a lot of these genres embraced like, you know, the extreme for its own sake, and they did away with like a harmony and everything, just, you know, in the pursuit of like novelty almost. You know, I mean, I think a band that like kind of was able to finesse that a bit is Mortician, and I think Mortician doesn't get enough love. Like, I don't even think they're active anymore. But so I'm not saying I'm not some Luddite who's like, you know, thinks like, you know, like freaks out if there's like a drum machine appearing in a freaking, you know, metal track or something. But like you know, the fact is that you know, yeah, complexity for its own sake like doesn't somehow confer legitimacy, nor does it make something listenable, you know. And like I think that I think some guys fall into this kind of trap of like, you know, they decide they're gonna like things because they're like not really accessible, you know, and because like because like there's not like real harmony there, you know, so they can pretend it's like this esoteric thing that they're up on and that like squares don't understand. I mean, there's always been some of that to like, you know, the metal subculture, but particularly as kind of metal's like interface with tech in a real way, you know, like I've seen that more and more. But you know what? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that I always like the necro black metal, like only 9 people listen to this band kind of. It's just I always found it to be pretentious and just like and retarded. Like, yeah. I can't stand that. It's like, why as a musician would you not want to write music that people like? You know, it to me, this is like the purest, most monstrous manifestation of internalized liberalism that you can just come up with. You know, I'm not like, what were artists and performers in ancient times? The skald, the bard, the poet, people that they understood that their role was to captivate others with their story and their talent and their voice. And, you know, this was like, they considered it magical, right? You could you could captivate people and immerse them in your story just with your voice or your song or whatever. You were projecting. It was like a special thing. Whereas these guys are like, I call it the selfish artist archetype. This, oh well, I just write music that I want to hear. I write music that I like. I just want to break all the rules, bro. I just want to be such an edgy try-hard that nobody except 6 retards in their basements pretend to like my shitty music. Dude, write a good fucking song, jerk off. How about that? How about we write some good songs that people can get into? And that's my beef with a lot of this kind of new school stuff. Where's the good songs, right? You mentioned Morbid Angel. Yeah, Morbid Angel's heavy as hell. Trey Azathoth is an excellent guitar player. Like, they are very, very talented and proficient. They write catchy, good-ass fucking songs, right? They got songs. You got, they got, songs off their album Domination that are effectively, like, the Back in Black of death metal. You know what I mean? You hear Where the Slime Live, everybody knows that song. That's a hit. You know what I mean? You don't have to be some poppy douchebag to like, you know, it just, I don't know. The association of being a good songwriter with being a poppy douchebag is just like the gayest thing to me. I think that people should. Too,
yeah, I mean, and the flip side too, you know, like I'm a huge fan of Emperor. I mean, I like black metal a lot. You know, I love Immortal. I love Emperor.
I love Immortal. Immortal's great.
Yeah. I dig Ad Hominem, and I like some of the National Socialist black metal that doesn't get a lot of attention. I mean, it does by, like, you know, for all the wrong reasons. But, you know, the Emperor was actually a highly political band. But they didn't, like, club you over the head with it, and they didn't sacrifice harmony and listenability, you know, to convey some kind of political message. You know, nor did they set about to make something deliberately ugly. I mean, that's the thing too, man. Like in metal, like you know, a lot of the ethos of metal is kind of shocking people out of torpor and apathy, and that's dope. I mean, that's important. But, you know, some of these artists and some of these kids internalize the idea that, you know, like the way to do that is like be like as ugly as possible. You know, and that's fucked up, man. Because like that's not what art's supposed to be about. I mean, I like, that's not to say that, you know, like nobody should shy away from brutal topics. I mean, my own science fiction, I mean, I deal very much with those things in a direct capacity, but that's different than something being deliberately ugly, you know, and like it's not. Yeah, and I mean that's the thing too. It's like you're not, you know, it's almost like if something's like enjoyable and palatable to like an ordinary person, like, oh, that's you know, that's pussy shit. Like, you're not being serious. It's like, well, then what are you doing, man? Like, you're trying to, you know, you're not. There's nothing like edifying about that. You know what I mean?
Just being subversive. It's just subversion.
Yeah, exactly. But so I mean, I think Emperor is an example. I mean, I hold them out because, you know, their final album was Prometheus. It dropped, I want to say, in 2001 or 2002. That's like an example, like a 21st century metal record that's just like outstanding, and it utilizes tech, you know, and splendid production values, you know, and real kind of virtuoso musicianship to create but it's heavy as hell, and it doesn't compromise in its political message, you know, like even when Emperor became like quasi mainstream, you know, they never stepped away from their politics. So I mean, it can be done. It's a perfect example, you know, like you don't need to sell out principles or like water down your sound or something to you know, to break through and be impactful. You know, I mean, that's something to keep in mind too. And these days, especially, you know, there's people like there actually is real political dialogue these days, particularly among younger people, you know, in a way that was unthinkable like 30 years ago, you know. So again, I mean, you know, I don't want to sound like some, you know, kind of like Pollyanna optimist, you know, like, oh, like things aren't so bad. I mean, things actually are pretty fucked up. But, you know, at the same time, we do have certain advantages in what we're trying to accomplish, you know, like both politically and like if you're an artist or a writer, you know, if you to your point, like you do need to kind of be your own, you know, like marketing department, and you do need to literally like put yourself out there, and that can be hard to do. I mean, just psychologically, it's intimidating. But man, like people, to your point also, because people are isolated and people are lonely. Like people really appreciate it, man, if you like reach out to them in that way, and take an interest in what they're doing, and say like, hey, let's collaborate together on this, or just like, hey, let's let's get together and talk politics, or like, hey, let's when I come through, wherever I'm going, let's get together and and kind of converse about these topics, and that's really, like I said, man, like it's the fact that you can reach out and communicate with anybody on this planet, for essentially free. I mean, that is a huge advantage we do have, and that doesn't completely balance out the challenges we face and the obstacles to what we're trying to do, but it does somewhat rectify the imbalance. I believe that very much.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I do. I think that, especially like in my experience now is like doing indie publishing and stuff like that. I would have never been able to do this, 30 years ago. Right.
Right.
Nowadays, you could just upload your book on Amazon or Ingram Spark or Lulu or BookBaby or whatever, or pay some just very minimal fees. And now you're a published author. Back in the day, like 20, 30 years ago, that wasn't a possibility.
And monetize. I mean, I'm not made. It's not like I'm getting rich, but I mean, writing isn't my only, content creation isn't my only source of income, but it is about half of my income. And the fact is, I'm just a guy who, granted, I've been at this for a long time, but I'm just a guy who was like writing stuff on the internet, like quite literally just posting stuff on forums, and posting essays on political sites. And then just like by word of mouth, like people read my stuff. So, then I started like dropping long form stuff and like people bought it. And that would have been that would have been unthinkable. Really even 15 years ago, man, like you could monetize in that way somewhat, but it would be difficult, man. Here, hold on 1 second, okay? Just 1 second.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah, sorry about that kitchen alarm was going off.
Hey, it's all good. So, you mentioned one thing I kind of wanted to come back to, and I do want to talk to you about your book and science fiction and everything like that. You mentioned something about guys just making things ugly on purpose. I actually just had this thought recently. I was just thinking I was like in the shower, and I'm thinking, why is it? Because I watched that Beavis and Butthead movie, and I said, like a whole bunch of thoughts started flowing through my head, and I started feeling some kind of way. So I'm like going through my head, why is it, do I not feel the extreme stuff as much? And why is it that I really keep going back to this, like either the old school stuff or the stuff that sounds kind of old school? And one of the things that came into my mind, and I don't know if this is the reason, but I think that I no longer appreciate art forms that purposely mock, subvert, or oppose beauty. I like to hear some kind of beauty. And some of those bands that you mentioned like Emperor, Immortal, like these Immortal, like, yeah, they're a black metal band, but if you listen like At the Heart of Winter, they have so many of these like beautiful ambient passages that are just, they just write beautiful music too. That it's hardcore, and it's harsh, and you know what I mean, but there's beauty in it as well. You mentioned bands like Cannibal Corpse. I loved I'm not so big on the Barnes era Cannibal Corpse anymore. My favorite Barnes album is The Bleeding, and then I like the very early Corpse Grinder stuff. But these albums, they first of all, they wrote really good songs, right? Just really get caught in your head. You know what I mean?
It's also, with Corpse, just let me insinuate, like Corpse was like, the way to treat Barnes era Corpse is like you would a horror movie. And like that stuff really was shocking, man. Like when it dropped, and it's like, it was gratuitous, and it was in your face, but it had there's a place for that, like the aptitude behind the production, the virtuosity behind it, and the production chops were really dope. It was not some like half-assed like effort. Yeah, very much.
Yeah. but it was like you listen to Cannibal Corpse, and I don't know if beauty is the right word, but there's something natural about it. There's something organic about it. You listen, especially that, listen to the bleeding, right? What's I believe the opening track is Through the Eyes of the Dead. That's just like, it's raw, it's primal. The sound of Paul's drums, which have this like, he does the bomb blast, and it has that really chunky kind of tone. It's like, has its own vibe, it has its own spirit. And to me, like, that was like beautiful, because it was captivating. You know what I mean? It wasn't pretentious.
And like Vince Locke's artwork is really gruesome, but it hits you hard too, man. And like he's really, I really dig Vince Locke as an artist. Like, he doesn't just draw comics. He was he's got an interesting background. But yeah, and if I remember with Tomb of the Mutilated, that was like the first Corpse album that I really gave. I think that was the first Cannibal Corpse album I bought. I don't listen to a lot of Cannibal Corpse like now, and I didn't then really, but like Tomb of the Mutilated, if you put on a pair of headphones at night and just like, cranked it, like, yeah, man, it was definitely like an immersive album, man. Very much like a mind album almost. Like even though people don't think of death metal as being they don't think of it as like, they generally associate that kind of, inner mind experience with like psychedelic music and stuff. But no, Cannibal Corpse definitely had those sensibilities with it. And Barnes was a big stoner, and he was like a big Black Sabbath guy. So I mean, that was very deliberate. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, they did a very good job at crafting an immersive fantasy with their art, is what they did. Yeah. And speaking of crafting an immersive fantasy with art, Mr. Thomas is a science fiction guy. I actually, Mr. Mike sent me your book, Steelstorm.
Oh, that's great.
And I read it, and I definitely found it really interesting. It's something that's pretty different to what I'm usually used to reading, and I wanted to kind of talk to you about it. I was not aware that you were a science fiction guy. Can you tell us, like, how you got into science fiction and what science fiction is? Give us your take on science fiction.
Well, I got into science fiction. I mean, science fiction was really, there's still good science fiction being put out, and science fiction is still alive as a genre. I mean, I'm a guy who writes science fiction, so obviously I believe it still has merit and still has relevancy as a platform. But science fiction really kind of came into its own in the Cold War, and the reason why is not just because there was such a the Cold War involved this kind of this naked confrontation with technology. The most on the nose iteration being the threat of nuclear weapons, but like the space race, and there's all these like existential questions, and confronting like annihilation, quite literally, that and kind of man's role as an individual in these like massive structures, science fiction was really kind of a way to explore these ideas, and with the alibi that it was the writer was dealing in counterfactuals, or like fantastical scenarios. So I was always, as a kid, I was always interested, in military science and politics and stuff. I mean, even though as a kid, you don't fully grasp these things. I started reading stuff like Arthur C. Clarke, and Isaac Asimov, and stuff like the Foundation series. And they're really kind of like opened my mind to like different ways of thinking about political and historical questions. And ultimately I got really into Frank Herbert and Dune. And I mean, to the point where, other than Harlan Ellison and Frank Herbert, like by the time I was like 18, 19 years old, I didn't read much outside of those two authors. Okay. And I mean, Ellison, I got mixed feelings about. He's a brilliant guy, and he's had a big impact on my own writing. But most of the writers I draw inspiration from are guys like John Stakely, who unfortunately died young. So his catalog was very small. and guys like Shane Stevens, you know, the crime author. So I mean, I'm probably not a conventional like science fiction fan in terms of, you know, like there's not like this huge catalog of science fiction that, you know, I'm always reading, but you know, I started writing it because, you know, my thing is political theory, and you know, the Steelstorm universe, I've had it in my mind since I was about 12 or 13 years old, okay, in like some form or another,
Awesome.
like the characters. And when I started getting paid for writing political content, you know, I started thinking, I basically wrote the first Steelstorm volume like as an experiment, you know. I'm like, okay, you know, if people go for this, that's great. I mean, I didn't even care if I made a profit, as long as I didn't like lose money on it. You know, I'm like, you know, as long as like I don't lose money on this, I'll keep writing them. But you know, it actually was profitable, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Like people really liked it, you know, and so that motivated me to make it into a series. You know, I am very impressed. It's going to be dropping Steelstorm Volume 2, you know, in coming weeks. You know, I plan to make it like a 5-part series. I mean, I might go beyond that, but it's, you know, I haven't decided yet. But that's basically why I got into writing science fiction, you know, because it's a way of exploring politics and historical ideas and questions, you know, in a way that where you're not bound by the historical record. You can explore potentialities, you know, that could have happened, but also, you know, you can explore things, you know, relating to war and peace, relating to race, you know, relating to relations between, you know, like men and women and stuff, and you know, and as well as like sex and violence that would be kind of tasteless or on the nose, or not really readable if you just kind of, you know, wrote a series of essays on it, but you know, in story narrative form, it's actually impactful. So I mean, it's all those things, but also, like I said, I kind of in my mind since I was a kid, I've had these kids like the main players in the Steelstorm universe. Like I've had these characters in my mind since I was a kid in various forms, you know. So it felt good to just kind of put them to paper again, because I hadn't in, you know, really probably since I was in high school. But that's kind of the short version.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed. I saw it on Amazon like a couple months back. I saw that like along with my books, the Bizarre Archives, it said that like customers also bought Steelstorm, which is pretty cool. So,
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I was like, you know what? A lot of what happened is Thomas introduced a lot of these young guys to science fiction that probably never even considered it, and then they saw this, you know, other publisher in the kind of spheres. You know, Mike shares a lot of my stuff, and they're like, "Oh, I'll give this a try." So it's like you introduced a lot of people that probably just thought science fiction was for Star Wars nerds or like whatever. It wasn't like it wasn't like some based, you know, imaginative art form. So that's you know, really, really cool. You mentioned about science fiction kind of being a vehicle for exploring ideas in kind of an artful way that isn't like you said, like the sex and the violence and stuff like that is not. If you wrote like a political essay with that would come off. It would come off weird. Number one, a lot of people would have a really bad reaction. I would have a bad reaction to it.
Yeah, exactly.
But and I've noticed this too. I write some science fiction, and I also write some sword and sorcery. And in both of my kind of worlds that I write in, it's always gruesome. There's bitches with their titties out. There's like, it's like I go ham on it. You know what I mean? And guys that would normally think that that's like degenerate or they'd hate it, like, this is fucking brutal. This is dope. So it's so much fun to kind of like express those kind of primal, very raw human things in your story alongside of these like metaphors and everything like that.
Well, it's also and it's also, I mean, these are things people have to deal with. I mean, hopefully, if you live in the developed world, I mean, unless you're a guy who's like ripping and running and living like a criminal lifestyle, hopefully, like you're not dealing with violent situations literally day to day.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's, you know, it is something that you know, you have to deal with, you know, and sexuality is weird. I mean, you know, it just on its face, it's weird. I mean, even if you're, you know, like a normal guy in that regard, you know what I mean? It's like, so the fact is that it's like a way, there's no reason to like shy away from this kind of thing, because this kind of stuff like impacts people's lives in direct capacities, in sometimes catastrophic ways, and sometimes in great ways. But the fact is, yeah, people shouldn't be afraid to address those topics, and that's why. So I never shied away from dealing with that stuff, but it's but again, it's like it's what the author's intent is, and it's the context, like it's if you're like writing about that kind of stuff because like you get really turned on by violence, or if you're writing about that kind of stuff because you got like a pornographer's kind of sensibility, like yeah, that's gross. But I mean that's but I mean that it's as long as one isn't doing, as long as an author's not up on that kind of stuff, there's not anything wrong with addressing these kinds of topics. And plus, frankly, like if you're going to deal with politics, I mean, I don't want to come off like some weirdo, like post 68, Jungian or something, and say like everything was back to sex and violence. But I mean, frankly, man, like people are a lot animal. I mean, people are made in the image of God, so I mean, we're a lot more than that. But part of you is an animal, okay? Like, and it's, I mean, thankfully, men who've achieved high civilization have been able to corral those impulses through will and reason. But if people claim that like this kind of stuff and these impulses don't like impact people in a day-to-day capacity, like they're lying. So it's if you're gonna talk about the human condition in a serious way, like in your writing, that kind of stuff is gonna feature it's gonna loom pretty large. At least it's at least going to be in the background and casting a long shadow, So I never really self-censored, but I think that's one of the reasons people like my stuff, because it's I take feedback, I take reader feedback seriously, because like if you don't, you're an asshole. You're like one of these who, like you said, are like, yeah, I don't write music for anybody else. I write it for me. It's like, it's like I don't write science fiction because like I think I think my own ideas are so freaking awesome. I don't want to like read it, read my own stuff and jerk off. It's like I write it so that the readers get something out of it and they enjoy it, and it helps them develop. To your point, helps them develop their thinking. So I take reader feedback very seriously, and yeah, like I said, it's been almost uniformly positive, and nobody's told me like, hey, you should tone it down because the stuff about race, or the stuff about like sexuality, or the stuff about some of the violent situations presented are upsetting. Like no one said anything like that. So it's I figure I'm doing something right.
Yeah, and also I always tell people, like guys that send stories into us and everything, your first job as a writer is to be entertaining. It doesn't matter what you're writing. If you could be writing, political theory, you could be writing anything. You have to be entertaining. Your prose has to be engaging. Or who wants to read that? Who wants to read the like boring word salads that are completely dry and exhaustive and vexing? Who wants to read that? Be entertaining. And when it comes to fiction, yes, we're trying to portray bigger messages. Yes, we're trying to portray different things. Sometimes guys just invent art for the sake of it. Sometimes guys just create beautiful, engaging things for the sake of it, just to give the experience. But doesn't matter what you're doing, all of the above, your job as an artist is to entertain. And these things like turbo violence. My last story that got published, my hero character literally went into the underworld, punched a demon to death, and ripped his guts out of his body, and then led a revolution in hell. And like fucking, it was like complete absurd, over the top stuff. People like loved it because it was like, they're like, this is your best story so far. And I was like, why? This one was completely absurd. I thought people were gonna hate this and think it was retarded. But people are like so starved for this, like just like unfettered, entertaining kind of art stuff that I don't know. I just think that the virtue of entertaining as an artist, as a creator, has kind of been pushed to the side for like different, more selfish agendas and reasons. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's quite insightful.
Yeah. So we're coming up. We got a few minutes left, Mr. Tom. But what What you said that the Steelstorm Volume 2 is coming out. What else can we expect from you coming up here soon?
What I'm working on, and this is I'm glad you asked, not just because I'm not because I want to not because I'm a shill, but because I
do
was
it.
I was hoping to have a pretext or a way to kind of insinuate this into the conversation.
Go right ahead. I love shilling.
Okay, well, I'm writing a book on international law, and specifically the kind of quite literally like the the juristic regime that was imposed on the world by the Nuremberg trials. That kind of that even if we accept that these things are largely a formality, that within the parameters of which the United States and the Soviet Union, and then after 1989, exclusively the United States, acted in its own negative self-interest, and just kind of propped up these juristic structures as rationalizations for its own conduct. I mean, even if whether you accept the legitimacy of these things or not, these structures are what shapes kind of the conceptual horizon of everybody on this planet. Okay, like in political terms and in terms of international relations, and the kind of not just the conceptual language of kind of international law and this kind of moral cons that is surrounds it, but just the way people conceptualize like war and peace, and what's acceptable within the kind of parameters of sovereign authority vis-a-vis military action and things. And that this stuff all came about at Nuremberg. Okay, that's really what replaced the sort of state system that had existed since the end of the 30 Years' War. The Peace of Westphalia. That the Peace of Westphalia basically established that there's no higher authority than the state in political affairs. It's not the Catholic Church. It's not some kind of congress of monarchies. It's simply like the national state. And there's an equality of status between all states, and if treaties are hashed out based on kind of reigning moral consensus, that's great. But otherwise, there's not any kind of binding law like to the affairs of nations. That was all replaced by Nuremberg, and this is a hugely complicated topic. But it a lot of people write about international law and just kind of like legal topics. They kind of make these things like deliberately opaque. And there's no reason why you don't need a law degree, or you don't need to have some kind of expertise and really dull and kind of boring and it's always indecipherable, kind of legalese in order to understand what I'm talking about. And it's essential to understand these structures and this kind of process that uh, was developed by the conclusion of the Second World War, to understand the politics kind of the world today. This the importance of that can't be overstated in conceptual terms. So I decided to write a book. I'm trying to keep it about 200 pages. That is basically, without being dumbed down or some kind of overly simplified rendering of the topic. I kind of wanted to write like an at a glance or like thin volume, like I said, about 200 pages. Like explaining these things, to kind of like the intelligent layman, and I think that'll clear up a lot of misconceptions, as well as people on our side politically. I mean, I think in a lot of I think it's kind of like the missing piece in their conceptual picture. So I'm trying to make it as compelling as possible, because I know on its face it sounds like a boring topic, but it needn't be, and that's part of my motivation for that too, for writing this too. So I I'm hoping I can drop that by like late winter. I'm thinking like January, February. And writing something like that is easier than writing fiction, because I mean, I know what I want to write, and I just got to like source it, and kind of organize my ideas and put them to paper. Like writing fiction, I mean, you're a guy who writes fiction. I mean, so I mean, you understand what I'm saying. It's like a lot more difficult. So this like Nuremberg International Law book, I'm working on that. I'm going to be intermittently working on Steelstorm 3, and but I've kind of put that on the back burner. I mean, because I just finished the second volume, and I'm launching a YouTube channel this fall, and I'm excited about that. and I think there's a lot of potential there, and I think that'll I think I think that'll help us build our brand, and not just me, but like the guys I collaborate with a lot. And plus, people seem to like it when me and the fellas do like live streams and stuff. So I mean, there'll be more of those kinds of things, and there's gonna be more like more video content through the YouTube channel. I mean, I realize that we've got a self-censor bit on YouTube in a way that we don't on our podcast, but those are kind of the things that I like immediately I'm preparing to launch or get involved with.
Yeah, that sounds. First of all, I gotta say, I really when I picked up Steelstorm, I really appreciated. Me and you have the same philosophy of shifting to shorter books. We have to compete with meme culture and people's modern attention spans, and books that are like way over 200 pages just don't sell as much anymore, unless there's some sort of like really like immortal collectible. Like right beside me, I have Imperium Press's Folk Tales of the Indo-European Tradition, which is an absolute monster. You could put this thing in a pillowcase and like beat a camel to death with it. But but this is the kind of book that you keep on your bookshelf forever, right? More like especially with fiction, we put out a lot of books that are like 50 pages, 60, 70 pages. Because, that's what people like now. Number one, they're collectible. People like to collect physical media, especially if they have cool covers and stuff like that. And number two, it fits into people's busy lives where they have millions of other distractions. So when the fact that you're writing on a big topic like this, where you're keeping it 200 or under, or you're hoping to keep it 200 or less pages, is like, to me, is a great philosophy. Another thing I wanted to ask you is what exactly you mentioned about the Nuremberg trials. I know that's like it sort of feels like you're alluding to that's kind of like what's leading up today with like the FBI raiding Trump and these kangaroo courts and all this stuff that we're seeing today. Is that what you're kind of building up into?
Well, I mean, the American culture, like I don't mean like the culture. I mean like the political culture is overly mired in legalism in all kinds of ways. And
what do you mean by
that's
political culture versus regular culture?
Yeah. I mean, and that's and this kind of this kind of overly legalized, for lack of a better descriptor, veneer that's on American political processes. Like, yeah, that definitely is like direct progeny of what happened in Nuremberg. But this whole idea, but just it goes even deeper than that. It's people's like entire conceptual vision. This idea that warfare is illegal. And wars aren't like the seasons. They're not. They basically don't arrive on grounds of providence. Like the weather or something, or like a storm. They're the result of conspiracies and. Well, like anybody who utilizes war as a quote policy instrument is engaged in a crime. So, America has some kind of, America has some sort of like carte blanche, like mandate to punish them for that. And this idea that, there's some kind of community of humanity, that shares values in common, based on some sort of like progressive secular humanist, worldview. Like that, those kinds of fictions all came about in Nuremberg. Okay. And, this idea that, America somehow is exempt from, the rules that it purports to be universally binding on everybody else. And plus too, this idea that, the entire kind of like ideology of anti-fascism, and this kind of, and the kind of like whole Zionist mythology that, there's this kind of ongoing conspiracy against, like the Jews as a people and things like that. Like all this stuff really was enshrined at the Nuremberg proceedings. There was like echoes of it, kind of within within like the New Dealer ideology and stuff, but it was by no means like institutionalized, and most people, even like people on the left, even like even out and out like kind of socialist types and progressives. I mean, not like trade unionist types. Like even they like didn't really think in these terms. Like so that's why. Yeah, it all ties together, and yeah, this idea in the in the 2020s where if the regime doesn't like somebody, they declare that they're quote unquote like engaged in criminality. Like, yeah, that's definitely the that's definitely the progeny of this structure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like this whole rules for thee but not for me kind of thing, where the global American empire is what they call it, which I sort of dislike that a little bit, because that excludes the vampires in Brussels and elsewhere, as like they're not actually part of it. It's part of this. It's all just like this kind of like American thing, when America is really just like the global attack dog. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I see exactly what you're saying. That's gonna be. I'm definitely gonna pick that book up. That sounds very interesting. You got the gears turning now. I'm thinking about this.
No, thanks for the endorsement, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're over an hour here, so we're gonna shut it down. You want to let everybody know where they can follow you if they're not following you already?
Yeah, definitely. I've got a very active, or we got rather. It's not just me. It's a bunch of people contribute great content there. We got a really active Telegram channel. For those of you who are on Telegram, and those who aren't, I behoove you to get on Telegram. It's really a great platform, and it's not at all censored. You can find me on Telegram at t.me/the7HOMAS777. You can find me on Substack. That's where we got our podcast also. It drops every 2 weeks, and there's a lot of longer form essays on there too. About half of what's on there is just totally free, but even the paywall content, it's only $5 a month. You can access everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's real Thomas777.substack.com. On Gab, I'm not super active on Gab, but I pretty much, when I like when I record with our friend Pete Canones, I'll like link to our the YouTube videos of the show, like on Gab, and if you reach out to me on Gab, I will answer. And I mean, periodically, like I post original stuff there, but you can find me on Gab just at real Thomas777. Those are the best places to find me. And like I said, I do have a YouTube channel. Like, the channel exists, but nothing's been uploaded there. But if you do join the channel, like by this fall, I'm thinking mid-September, we're gonna launch the channel officially. So keep that in mind. Like, if you look up the channel and you're like, hey, there's nothing on here, like, well, that's why it's coming. So just be patient.
All right. And how about this? Before we close, can you recommend a few of your favorite old school metal albums that people might not? What are your favorite kind of old school metal gems?
I'm a big fan of Grim Reaper, man, and like I was talking to our friend Scott Greer about a year ago when I was on. He was kind enough to host me on his podcast, and he's hosted me a few times, but we got on the topic of heavy metal, and yeah, he credited me with turning him on to Grim Reaper. They were kind of panned when they came out, in 86, 87. It's just kind of like an Iron Maiden clone. That's really not fair. And they really had their own sound, and very, very, very intense band. And if you're into new wave of British heavy metal type stuff, they're dope. And in that vein too, people should check out Diamond Head, and particularly a lot of young dudes probably aren't real aren't real familiar with Diamond Head. I'd include Armored Saint on that list. I'm a huge Armored Saint guy. And yeah, what else? Probably I'd say Frontline Assembly also. They're not a traditional metal band, but obviously that's where, they're an industrial band. They're from the kind of the wax track scene as it was in the 90s, but kind of if you like Fear Factory, and if you like that kind of subgenre of like cyber metal, well, a lot of its origins are owed to Frontline Assembly. So yeah, that's kind of like my short list.
Very cool. You ever get into Praying Mantis, another new wave British heavy metal band?
Yeah. I've not listened to them in many moons, but yeah. They're dope.
I'll throw that into the stack. Check out the album Time Tells No Lies. Really great. Really great album. All right, Mr. Thomas, thank you so much for coming on. I had a great time talking with you. You guys out there, thank you so much for tuning in, listening to me and Mr. Thomas yak about heavy metal, yak about science fiction, yak about art, yak about all the kind of stuff. It's a really, really great talk. If you are not already, go over to imperiumpress.org/podcast and sign up to the Gumroad. Lots of great stuff over there. Help Imperium Press grow into the institution that they were destined to be. It is their destiny to become this great immortal institution. So go over and sign up to the Gumroad. You get the Culture Dads podcast. You get the Imperium Cast podcast. You get hardback copies, exclusive hardback copies. Can't get them anywhere else. So go over there, sign up. You want to check out what I'm doing over on my end of things, you can go to thebizarchives.com if you're in the mood for some weird fiction in the styles of the golden age of pulp fiction, cosmic horror, sci-fi, sword and sorcery, all that over there. Lots of great books. We drop reprints. We got Man in the 25th Century, the original stuff from Buck Rogers by Philip Francis Nolan. Great stuff, $10. We got Algernon Blackwood's The Willows from 1907. We have Cosmic Horror Double Feature, which we dropped last year from our boy A. Cuthbertson. We just dropped The Chronicles of Heraldria, Sacred Times Part 1, if you like epic fantasy. And then also we have the flagship Bizarchives. Last month we dropped the Bizarchives issue 3. So many great returning authors, so many great new authors. You guys are going to love it. Follow us on Twitter and Telegram at the Bizarchives. Like always, thank you, hails, and blessings to all the Culture Dads out there. I'll see you guys next time.
You're listening to an episode of the latest Culture Dads, Age of Sword and Cassette, where two fathers and community leaders discuss modern culture from a timeless perspective. Head on over to culturedads.com for podcasts every week.